From the books I read about Zen Buddhism, I had the clear feeling that in order to go deeper into meditation or the search for reality, for that what is, you need a master, because otherwise you're just kept by your illusions. It's very hard to transcend them. And so my feeling was clear: if I want to be disciplined, I have very little discipline. I need somebody to help me, to inspire me with more experience. And then it was just this poster, this lecture I went to, and Kailash at that time was a lecturer. He said that he has a master and he wants to introduce his master. And I was so naive, I thought the master is staying in the hotel and the next day he would come with his master. And so I was going to the class that was offered afterwards, expecting to come to know the master, and I did come to know because they told more about Sri Chinmoy. I heard his songs, I saw a very special picture of him, and I immediately felt very, very comfortable. And like you said, it said that you don't find the master appears when you're ready. So I had the feeling the point was there, and it was very, very natural that I felt at home. I had found something that felt very, very familiar, and so it just developed. And I saw Sri Chinmoy only like a couple of months later. I became a student in April, and I saw him first in August 1981, actually. The first time I saw him, we were early in the morning at the track in Jamaica, practicing, I don't remember exactly, or just standing there. And then Sri Chinmoy came in Pulak's car, driven into the ground, and he got out of the car, and there was this like totally slender but also muscular 50-year-old athlete, I would say, spiritual master athlete, wearing track clothes, just a shirt and pants, and looking very handsome, you could even say. And I didn't have a spiritual feeling at all. I just said, okay, wow, this is Sri Chinmoy. But I didn't feel anything inside at the first moment. It was just some different occasion where I was just sitting there and meditating, and something deep inner was opening, and I felt a connection. And even Sri Chinmoy later said something that I had an experience or something like that. And it was very interesting for me because the outer appearance does not necessarily correlate to what you feel inside, or sometimes you just have to focus inside to really feel something, not look. We have in New York always this circus fun type of event where everybody is performing funny acts, and disciples or his students, they participate, they sit there, they enjoy themselves, they meditate at the same time. So it's a very nice mixture of this inner and outer world, spirituality and other things. And I remember I was sitting all the way on the top of the benches, and I was enjoying the whole scenery, admiring the talents that Sri Chinmoy students displayed. It was his 50th birthday, and like Radha had painted those balloons with the faces of all different students, and there were so many performances. They were just striking and showed so much talent, and I was just taken away, with all the talent and the joy and the atmosphere, which was like totally full of spirituality. And I was sitting there enjoying myself, meditating, and afterwards Sri Chinmoy said I had received the most light this day. So that was a very special experience for me as a very young student. During the celebrations in New York in August, I think also in April, there was one event called Jalaramani. Some people may still remember it. And it was fascinating. There was kind of synchronized swimming, and then we had, I think, also some kind of competitions. And if I'm not erring, we even once swam in a sari. So it was fun. It wasn't like too competitive. But I really loved that also the swimming was part of the whole spiritual path set up, kind of. And the other thing was that I wanted to have the same experiences as some of my co-students, spiritual brothers and sisters, who had entered into long distance running. Because Sri Chinmoy had started on his 47th birthday to create his long distance marathon philosophy or practice or team, and ran 47 miles. And then his students also started to enter into ultra running, into longer distance running. And I think the first multi-day started at that time, and people were telling about the inner experiences they had in these multi-day events. They said it can be heaven and hell, like you can suffer like anything, but then there are also moments, and sometimes extended moments, where you really feel bliss and peace, and like you forget the body and things change inside you, and you keep the experience also for a long time. It's a transformatory experience. And I really wanted to see how meditation can help transcend the physical limits or extend the physical limits and get deeper experiences which maybe only through meditation you might not be getting because the body is not so much involved. But I was a little bit heavy at the time, like now, but it was due to not quitting smoking and some other things. And I started getting running injuries like shin splints, knee problems, hip problems. Every time I wanted to do more. So I thought, okay, if I can't run then that much anymore, then I start swimming a little bit. I think it was around 83, 84 that one summer I really started to swim every day, like for 1 hour, just to stay fit and lose a little bit of weight and also strengthen my running. I never thought about swimming the English Channel. Like some people, they dream from their childhood on that one day they will swim the English Channel. It was never the case with me because I didn't even know that it exists, swimming the English Channel. So actually what happened was in 1984, one of our team members in Heidelberg, who was a junior master champion or something in swimming, he was inspired by Sri Chinmoy to try the English Channel. And he miserably failed because he totally underestimated the effect of the cold. He thought he's strong, he's muscular, he's well trained, but he was not aware of the cold. So after a couple of hours they had to pull him out. And then when we came to New York in 1985, we were at the tennis court with Sri Chinmoy. He had been playing, then we were standing around or sitting around and chatting. And suddenly Sri Chinmoy said, kind of out of the blue, isn't anybody of my disciples, or is there nobody from my disciples who wants to swim the English Channel, or something like that. It's not like word for word. And then he started even to pick a few names, to suggest names. And some of those names were quite unlikely people for swimming the English Channel. And then he asked for volunteers, and I really felt something in my heart. And because I loved swimming always just in the open water, not competitively, just swimming into infinity. And I had the feeling though, my mind said, you don't have the discipline to do that because you need to train. And like girlish as I am sometimes, I just said to the girls around me, I would love to, I would like to, you know, but didn't dare to say out loud. But unconsciously I knew they would say it, so I told it to them. And of course somebody said Vashanti. And then it wasn't like Sri Chinmoy would say, oh yes, Vashanti. No, he just said, why not? Sri Chinmoy gave us quite clear ideas how to prepare in a short period of time, because the goal was July, which is crazy.
1985?
Of that year, which is like absolutely crazy.
From April to July?
Yeah, end of April. But the first thing we did to test our abilities and our spirit was the next day we packed a car and we went to Jones Beach and jumped into the water. And it was freezing cold at that time. And I still remember, I think I was the first in and the last out. And Diksha was there with me. And I remember her saying, Vashanti, I can't feel my fingers anymore. And I said, oh, that doesn't matter. As long as you feel the rest, just stay in a little bit longer. And I think we stayed in for about 30 minutes or so. I don't know how many degrees it was, maybe 10 or 12, not very warm. And when we came out, it was so exhilarating to come out of the cold water, because the cold water affects the body in a very positive way. And it was just a great feeling. What happened was that Sri Chinmoy told us we have to have 2 intermediate goals to be eligible to go to Dover, because otherwise it wouldn't be safe and wouldn't make sense. So he told us after 4 weeks to be able to swim 18 kilometers, or like 2/3 of the channel distance, let's say, in open water at channel water temperature. And then another 4 weeks later, the whole channel distance, 21 miles, 33 kilometers, again in open water at channel temperature. Only if he had done those tests, he would recommend us to go to Dover. And I was booked for the end of July, and I made the tests. And I was actually at that time the only one, for various reasons, because in New York they had problems with the weather and other things. So when I went to Dover, there also we had to do a test swim, like 7 hours in the harbor. And it was really choppy, much choppier than here, and cold and windy. And people thought I didn't have muscles. I looked more like fat, not muscles. And so my boat pilot even said, are you trained? And I just had done whatever I could. And then I did the 7-hour swim, and it went by so nicely, and I felt so happy in this choppy water, like totally delight, even in those adverse conditions. And after 7 hours I still felt fine, so I had quite some confidence that it could happen. But the weather was too bad, so I had to stay for 2 tides. Helpers had to come, go, and still there was no window where we could swim. So Sri Chinmoy even asked me to come back to New York for the August celebrations, because the spiritual part was a very important part in the whole channel experience. Like I meditated every time before training and after training, because I knew it wasn't my capacity. It was only due to meditation that I could use the physical to such an extent. And I totally relied on like the inner power, kind of. So the good thing about it was all the waiting in Dover and then going back to New York, there we had another opportunity to train more in waves, which gives much more muscles than if you train in the swimming pool. And so we went to Jones Beach every day. We had a couple of 7 hours, no, like 5, 6, 7 hour swims and some shorter swims with a few other disciples. And that was another boost, kind of. And maybe also the warmer water there helped the body regenerate a little bit from the cold water training in Dover. So beginning of September, we were called back. There was another tide. There were pilots available. I had to switch my pilot. And very soon after arriving, we got the call, or I got the call that I could swim. The second person was swimming the next day. 1 or 2 days before the swim, my landlord, where I stayed for the few days there, took me up to the cliffs in Dover, and we had a nice view to France. You really could see clearly the French coastline. And I was sitting there and I had so much joy. It wasn't like I was nervous or dreading it or anything. I just had so much joy that finally my chance was coming to give the whole thing a go. And I was only looking forward to it. So we got everything packed, and we had an early morning start at 7 o'clock in the morning, I think. So it was easy also. Sometimes you have to start at 8 o'clock at night, which is totally different. And swimming into the day, it was a beautiful day. And I just remember that the first 2 hours were the most difficult, because then the mind is still operating. It's like you have to get into the flow. And after the first 2 hours, the time just passed so quickly. You always have a feed stop in the beginning after the first hour, then after 45 minutes or however you do it. And I remember after 6 hours, you're not supposed to look, but of course I did look. And after 6 hours I could see both coasts. I could see the White Cliffs of Dover and I could see France. And they told me I was in the middle. And I couldn't believe it. I just had this strong feeling that the swim had already been done. And I just had to finish it on the outer plane. But there was a total certainty that the swim had already been done. And after like 10 hours or so, they said I was making good progress and maybe we can do it in 12, 13 hours, which of course gave me more encouragement. And so we were slowly, evening was setting in and it was getting darker and the stars came. So I had no idea how it would be to swim in the dark, in the pitch black, but it wasn't pitch black. It was really, really beautiful with the stars, and every time you were breathing, you were looking up into the stars. And then at one point, that was actually interesting, I started seeing a light in the water. I mean, before I had been admiring like things in the water. I didn't have jellyfish. There were some algae or something, or some fish floating beneath. The sun was shining in. It was just so beautiful. And then at night, I saw this light in the water. I was like swimming towards the light. And then I saw Sri Chinmoy's face, actually, like the transcendental face. And at some point, it was more than 12 hours and I was wondering. And they said, okay, maybe 1 or 2 more hours. And I said, okay, that's fine. I still felt okay. Shomi, my helper, he said, he wanted to encourage me. He said, the water is not colder than in the morning. When I heard the word colder, I started getting goosebumps. And that just shows when you become very, very intense in sports or in anything, you're very receptive to ideas, to vibrations. And although he wanted to encourage me, it kind of had an adverse effect, but immediately it disappeared afterwards. It's just to show that helpers have to be careful. And so I continued swimming. After 2 hours, they said maybe 1 or 2 more hours. So it continued. And finally I saw the lights in the distance and I thought, okay, that looks like 2 more hours at least. And still felt okay. But then it was a bay. They had taken me deliberately a little bit around to the sandy beach, because on the barnacles, on the rocks, you can really hurt yourself. And the lights were from Visson, which was a little bit inland. And suddenly I felt something, my hand touching something. And I thought, is this mossy stones or what? And luckily I didn't realize it was jellyfish at that time. But my mind was a little bit out of it, I think. And then the waves started crashing over my head. And then I realized it must be the shore. And I put my feet down, it was sandy beach. And then I walked to the beach and up out of the water. And then I sat down. And it wasn't like exhilarating. It was just very calm, very peaceful. I felt gratitude. I meditated for 1 or 2 minutes. And then I had to swim back to the little boat, which took me to the big boat. And on the boat, then my helpers were dead. But because you couldn't talk for 17 hours, almost nothing, I was just talking. I mean, he was in contact with the boat the whole time. And I know from Minati, from my center, she was in New York at the same time. She was at Sri Chinmoy's house. And she told me what other people had told me also, that Sri Chinmoy had been at his house, because I was the first member of our team who attempted the channel. He was at his house meditating the whole time during my swim. And I totally had the feeling also, because many of his students knew about my attempt, that all the energy from Sri Chinmoy and also from all the disciples around the world who knew that we were in Dover attempting this really came to make it so easy and just delight. I know other people had many more difficulties in swimming the channel, and also the second time I did it wasn't the same feeling of delight. And I'm totally sure it was the energy of all my friends and team members, and especially of Sri Chinmoy, who was there all the time. And then when we arrived back, he immediately called and he asked me if I could come back to New York for celebration. The first thing that he said was not great what you did and things like that. He said, our goal is self-transcendence. That was one of the first things that he said. And I couldn't believe it, because for me this was just, okay, I had achieved this goal and that was it for now. And Srichima was immediately thinking of the next step. But he didn't urge it upon anybody. He just, a couple of days later again, he was looking into the air and saying to us, what do you think about swimming the channel, biking 150 miles and running 2 marathons? Do you think it's frightening or challenging? And of course, we said challenging. So this was actually the seed at that time that Sri Chinmoy planted to want to even think of continuing doing something in this world. I attempted to do it in 2008. I had trained up, of course. I had done in Canberra first ultra triathlon. I had done 2 triple Ironman in Germany, 2000, 2003, with other disciples together and with the help of other disciples. And only 2008 everything came together, because it takes money, it takes time, it takes a lot of dedication to train for the channel. You cannot just go and do it. And at that time I knew that the borderline you have to tread kind of is, for the channel you need to be able to tolerate the cold, and for the rest of the triathlon it's not too good to be too heavy, like especially for me when I run and I'm carrying too much weight and it's hot, then I collapse. So it was really, I had to find a balance. And in 2008 I didn't have the balance. I was very muscular, had less weight, and the weather was difficult. We had to also wait, come back, go back to Germany, get warmer and lose acclimatization. And when I tried in 2008, it was a day where I inwardly totally felt it wouldn't work. But for some reason I felt kind of forced to go out that day, which wasn't a wise choice, but maybe in the greater scheme it was okay to do it. So after 13 hours something, they took me out of the water because I was getting hypothermic. And at that time I had a lot of support, financial, from my friends. I had lots of helpers, they came twice. I had a team for the rest of the triathlon who came with a car, with the bikes and everything. All these things were great, except that I wasn't performing. And the interesting thing was also that even though I didn't make it that time, I was dropped in Dover by Alison, who was my pilot at the time. And my friends, I had a help on the boat who helped me get to the hotel. And then my friends came a little bit later with a car and everything. And by the time I had had a hot bath, got some rescue remedy, and slept a little bit, I felt totally fine the next morning, except the weather was horrible. I wouldn't have wanted to bike at that time. And we drove home and everybody was so happy, although we hadn't made it. It was very interesting. So the next year I didn't feel I had the money, but I felt I should train, and because there can always happen something. And what happened was, in September 2009 I was asked to join a relay team with the Czech girls and one girl from Iceland. And somebody had dropped out and they desperately needed a support swimmer. So I was very happy that my feeling was right, that I had trained a little bit and I could help them. And it was like a gift to have the experience in the relay, to be the last swimmer touching French ground. So that was like an omen already that, yeah, it was going on. Then in 2010 I didn't know until the last minute if I could really try because of the money. I had gotten a spot, first spot on the pilot last minute in December, which was amazing because they are booked out for years. It was Eddie Spelling, who actually had taken Vijoya and had taken our relay. So he knows about our spiritual aspect. He told us how in Vijoya's case there was a miracle at the end when the current was not turning and allowing her to land. And also when we did the relay, there was also kinds of miracles. So it was a very nice setting. And he allowed me also to pay in installments. He didn't insist. So, but because everything was a little bit uncertain if I could really train and get the money together, I did not inform many people. And I just hoped that by grace the helpers would come, and at the end it just so happened that it was a little bit difficult with the helper situation, but I also didn't want to make it a big deal to the outside world because it was a little bit of a personal thing to me. I was extremely grateful to be able to achieve it, and especially as a 25th anniversary swim. It was terrific. I just thought one of my motivations to do these things is I think that it will inspire other people, not to swim the channel maybe, but to see you're not old at 50 plus. You can even fulfill your dreams if it takes 20 plus years. Sometimes things just take time, and yeah, you just have to believe in it and keep it up and just pursue it. I'm booked for October to try to attempt to swim the Straits of Gibraltar, which is between the southern tip of Spain or of Europe and Africa. And what is inspiring for me in this respect is the idea swimming to Africa. There's a famous book by Lynn Cox, Swimming to Antarctica. That's a totally different level. Swimming to Africa it's not that big, I would say, also compared to the channel. The channel is much longer distance and you have to train much more. The difficulty with Gibraltar is that there are stronger currents, so I also don't know if I can make it. It's the same situation with the weather. You go there and you don't know if you can swim. You have to wait for the right winds, and sometimes the fog can come in. But the idea to do it was because I still have the idea of doing the Channel Triathlon, the big one I call it, from Dover all the way to Heidelberg. The last one was the small one. And you have to keep doing things and challenging your things to keep up your fitness. And also I feel for my personal life, I need certain challenges to go out and train and not just run 2 miles or something like that. And it really adds to my spiritual life. That's my feeling, absolutely. That if I don't do something on the physical plane, then also my spiritual life, my meditation, my discipline goes down. So it complements each other. In the last time in 2010, it was from Dover via Brussels to Aachen. That was the channel, 300k biking, which is about 180 miles biking, and then 2 marathons with a little bit of rest in between. But my goal actually had been Dover-Heidelberg, which would be, instead of 300k, would be about 580 kilometers biking. I think the running I keep for the 2 marathons because I'm not such a runner, but I can also still change it if I feel like it, to make it like into a triple Ironman plus the channel, which would be 3 marathons. It's different degrees of joy, I guess. Like in 85 it was really delight, and I could feel it afterwards. I was beaming forever, I think. And in 2010 it was a little bit more work, but as I said, I always have to keep this balance, and there's always some degree of joy. It's definitely there.